MentorEd, a series of video logs brought to you by Alliance Tutoring. I'm Ken Hinker. I wanted to take up a question that you hear quite a lot from young charges, from students, and plenty of other young people alike, and that is, when am I ever going to use this? I come home from school, I sit at the table. What did you do at school today, son? Nothing. What did you do at school today, daughter? Nothing. And then they begin to tell you about their geometry test and how difficult it was, and they say, when am I ever going to use math in my life? When am I ever going to need to know the Pythagorean theorem? Why does it matter that a whale eats with the baleen? What good could it possibly do for me to know that Great Gatsby turned out all right in the end? It was the foul dust that floated in his wake that closed out the abortive sorrows of men. Well, I'd like to propose an answer, one on the back of 20 years of teaching and a handful of other degrees besides. And it's this. I'll always refer back to language, I'll refer back to etymology, and I'll make a couple of references to important literary works that I hope are going to condition the response, the answer that I would give. I hope that this doesn't get too completely esoteric, and you'll see in just a moment that what we're really talking about is a mind rather than a job, rather than a living. We're talking about the production of a way to live in it, which is what Hemingway says, a way to live in the world. First, we have to go back a little bit earlier. We'll go back to Aristotle. And Aristotle was nothing if not a philosopher of mind. And in a text that was called the Poetics, he coined a term that has come into common usage in both philosophical circles and then later on in a variety of other endeavors. And it's called telos, T-E-L-O-S. And telos' definition is a purpose, a goal of a thing, a true final function, either of an idea or perhaps even of a creature. What is the true purpose of a mollusk? What is the true purpose of economics? What's the true purpose of the study of bats? What is the telos of those things? That's another way of getting at the same question that our young student would say, what the heck is the purpose? Why do I need to know this stuff? I'm never going to use math when I'm at the grocery store, right, trying to figure out the unit price in order to make sure that I'm getting the best value for that hard-earned cash, right? You and I both know differently, of course, but it's important that our students are able to see these things in concrete terms and that we have the right language to explain what can be both a daunting and exhausting exercise, 12 years of study, 15 years of study, 20 years of study, and it's appropriate and right that any of us would say, what the heck is this good for? Why am I doing this? Telos is also in Cicero's term, so we've gone from the Greeks now to the Romans, but Cicero would have called that the supreme end of man's endeavor, life's work. Opposite to telos would be techne, T-E-C-H-N-E. And techne is the method to achieve that goal, the means of achieving the true purpose or the final end of an exercise or an activity that we engage in. Of course, techne is what gives us the term technology. And what I'll suggest to you today is that technology ought to be the rigorous, lifetime, liberal arts, and plenty of others, education. That ought to be the technology, the hoops that we put ourselves through, the stretching of our mental powers that we take on. And so, what is the purpose of that technology? What's the purpose of feeding our garbage minds, is what a high school teacher of mine used to say. Why fill it up when we can make ourselves as efficient as possible. Arrows that spring from the bow to the inevitable bullseye of making money, continuing our families. Right? Those are important things, but they don't help one to live a full life. They are the means by which that can be accomplished. But what is the telos? I'd put it something like this. There are a million definitions, I'm sure, but perhaps this is worth thinking about if you hear this question from someone that you know, someone that you love. What am I going to do this for? Why am I engaged in this difficult process? And I'd say that education's function is producing a full and a rich and a varied intellectual life. It ought to create a mind that's curious, that's content with inquiry, that is satisfied with the sedimentary accumulation, really, of knowledge. And it's knowledge about the material world, and it's knowledge about our fellow man. Education's function, its telos, is not vocational training. The exercises and activities that go on in a classroom are not simply for skill acquisition so that one can, quote, become good at writing in order to submit advertising copy when we get to Madison Avenue. Those things are important, but that's not the goal. That's not the true final function, like Aristotle would say. And this is why content matters. And a lifetime learner, that term that we've heard that has become a little cliche, I suppose, but only because it expresses something that is true at its heart and has been repeated multiple times. A lifetime learner must see intrinsic value in weaving a web of comprehension. They must see that it helps them to navigate adulthood, and that it's going to give them a deep appreciation for human achievement. Content matters. What we read and consume and create matters just as much as any of the skills that we might use in order to unpack that content. So what am I going to do with this? Well, I'm going to learn about my own cultural inheritance and the cultures of other places around the globe. I'm going to take up that responsibility that comes with learning my inheritance. And that responsibility becomes an inclination to learn and to foster our cultural understandings, by which I mean fine art, certainly literature, and all the various other trainings and ideas that would fall underneath, like math, economics. But what we also need to do is to continue that cultural inheritance. And this, of course, is where the intersection of education's telos would line up with what you and I do, with educating young people, perhaps our own children, or perhaps other people's. And so I'm reminded then of one of my favorite quotes from Hemingway. It's from The Sun Also Rises, and the central character, Jake Barnes, is thinking on the difficulties that he's had in his life, the traumas that he's experienced, and the ups and downs of outrageous fortune. And he decides, though, as he begins to ponder all of the different ways that he has paid for the experiences and the understandings, and let's just say the wisdom that he now has at the end of 35 years, I think he is, perhaps a little bit younger. And he tells us that the world was a good place to buy in. And you bought for things through hard work, through study, through heartache and pain, and through coming to know other people, learning about other people. And so if we can convince our young people that the world is a good place to buy in, then perhaps they'll have the ground on which they can begin to stand as they answer the question, what is this good for? Why am I putting myself through this? And Matthew Arnold, a 19th century Brit, said that our cultural legacy, the culture itself, is the best that's been thought and said. And I think it's important to make distinctions among the different pieces of art and among the liberal arts that our students might be learning. It's the best that's been thought and said. Students need to feel as if they have to live up to a cultural inheritance, that there are ways for us to understand why certain ideas and why certain ways of government perhaps are unique, why they're important in their ingenuity and that uniqueness. Okay, that's the heady stuff. I hope it's interesting. But what do we do? What do you and I do? Well, we have to model and we have to offer to young people a Catholic reading life. And I don't mean capital C Catholic, although St. Augustine is pretty good if you want to read City of God. But I mean Catholic lowercase, which is to say ecumenical, far-reaching and wide and varied. What books do you have lying around the house? How supportive are you of students' independent reading, even if it's something that we feel like might be flippant or useless? Where does it go, and do you support it? We need to express excitement at knowledge and new activities constantly, all the time. We have to show that becoming a culture vulture, and by that I don't mean the pejorative sense, but someone who throws themselves into museum life, that is constantly attempting to read something new or to share a new idea with friends. They need to hear us at our dinner parties, discussing exciting things in the news, current events, and doing so in a way that's measured and cooperative and intellectual and rigorous. And so as we become culture vultures, and as we begin to think about what is the purpose, the telos of all this, we have to understand that, in my mind, the highest of human endeavors are reading and writing, and discussion with one another, and making things. And you can't make anything, a mind, a career, a family, a life, unless you've done your background, unless you've done your homework, unless you have read and written about and discussed the best that's been thought and said. So perhaps there's a telos in there for you. That's one of the ways that I might define mine. And I hope that this doesn't apply strictly to just those of us who have chosen scholarship as our endeavor. I hope you can see how a hedge fund manager who reads Heidegger on the side, a social worker who is interested in Warren Buffett's investment strategies, I hope you can see how the various facets of all of those interests and intrigues can form a kind of a diamond, and that's the diamond that we pass on to younger people. So, what's it good for? It makes us wealthy in the best sense, our minds. I'll see you next time.